Welcome to Cloudy with a Chance of Podcast. I'm Chief Meteorologist McCall Vrydaghs here with my co-host, Meteorologist Kirstie Zontini, and you can see we have a special guest here in the view, and we also have a fourth guest that you can probably hear. Kirstie, why don't you explain what that noise is?
Yeah, if you hear a little bit in the background of this podcast, it is my youngest daughter, Molly. She is home with us, still not in daycare yet, so every now and then they get to be a part of our work day. And for today, it is Bring Your Daughter to Work.
Oh, yeah.
With Cloudy with a Chance of Podcast.
There has been a few episodes, go back like 5 or 6, and you'd see me stepping away, taking care of Gia, the chaos of everybody doing Zoom.
Exactly.
Oh, man. So let's talk about the weather. The weather is gorgeous right now. I mean, you're sitting outside on your patio there, Kirstie, and it's nice. We're actually normal, for this time of year right now. We don't have too much humidity. Temperatures are close to where they should be for the middle of July. We've seen a lot of extremes lately, not only this year, but years past. So that really parlays in today's conversation, right?
Exactly. It does. And I think it's interesting, McCall, because we use the word normal or average in reference almost every single day when we're broadcasting. And today, our guest from the National Weather Service office in Wilmington is Nate McGinnis. He has been with the National Weather Service office in Wilmington, Ohio for about 2 years. But he's going to dive into what these norms are that we talk about, these climatological normals. And I think that it works really well because, McCall, this summer, as you mentioned, we've been hotter than normal. We've had a few stretches of wetter than normal weather. We've had dew points that were above normal. So now we're going to kind of put some reference into what normal means and how the Weather Service office and across the country, NOAA, just released their new 30-year averages. So welcome, Nate. Thanks so much for taking time out of your shift to be with us.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invitation.
So Nate, why don't you give us a little bit of background on yourself? Obviously 2 years at the Weather Service office in Wilmington, but where did you go to school? And I guess where else have you been? Because I know your journey is usually in NOAA, it's not always a one-stop shop.
Well, that's a great thing. And I think it's good to be able to move around. So the fact that I started my career in actually Jacksonville, Florida, I grew up in Ohio my entire life. I initially went to school in Springfield, Missouri, and then transferred to the Ohio University in Athens, Ohio, and completed my bachelor's there, and took a year off. I tried to get into the National Weather Service, and there weren't a whole lot of jobs back then. So, kind of did some thinking and eventually decided that going back to my master's degree would be very beneficial, both on just the education part, but also the experience part. It's a completely different role to be there in a graduate setting, and you're teaching undergrads and you're seeing, wow, what a goofball, I was back then. And all these new young kids are, it was a great experience. And, completing that in 2016, in the summer there, 2016, I then applied. There were a lot more National Weather Service jobs available, and I applied everywhere. That's what we're told to do. It's go to Alaska, go wherever you have to go. So I actually had 2 interviews, and they couldn't be further apart. I guess they could be a little bit further apart, but one was Eureka, California. You're talking Northern California, and then the other one was Jacksonville, Florida. So I did both of those, was able to get the Jacksonville, Florida position. And for a starting point, for someone who grew up in Ohio and who knows Ohio River Valley weather, Jacksonville, Florida is not Ohio. It's especially Jacksonville. It's like a mix of southern Georgia and northern Florida. You get your daily thunderstorms during the warm season, and you get your interesting weather during fire weather and marine weather during the winter. And then you guys know tropics is just a whole. It's just it's a whole nightmare down there. So even though I was only there for just over 2 years, I got to experience literally everything from winter weather to a major, impactful hurricane and Hurricane Irma. So I actually left Jacksonville, Florida to come up to Wilmington. One of my last weeks that I worked there was actually when Hurricane Dorian was slamming the Bahamas.
Mm-hmm.
This really powerful 185 mile per. I mean, it was just a tremendously large storm. But that week, I actually didn't work in the office. I worked at the Jacksonville EOC, where I got to brief core partners and talk to them about the weather. It was a great experience to be in that environment, because it's kind of like getting a view into what you guys do. But by actually being there, you get to experience a little bit more of that weather sector, that you really see why what we do matters, and because of their decision making that they have to have. So that experience was great, and then immediately drove up here and started working here at Wilmington, Ohio. And it was kind of after Memorial Day, so I guess it was like I kind of missed out of the experience with that, although my family was directly impacted by one of the tornadoes. So like it was, yeah. So my parents in Southeast Pickaway County, they were one of the ones that got hit by the EF1 tornado. And yeah, so it was like the experience of being down there and all of that, all of Memorial Day happening up here. I mean, I've been in for almost 5 years, and it's just been an incredible experience during those 5 years. So it looks like that decision to go back to graduate school ended up really paying off, just with the experiences that I've been able to have.
Nate, we are really lucky to have you in the Wilmington office, I will just say, because there is that partnership, as you just mentioned a few moments ago, and being able to work with the Weather Service meteorologists on a daily, especially when you get into active weather. I mean, it's such a great bond that we have, and we can't do what we do without you guys. And you said, you can't get that message out without us. So it is such a great partnership. I know we're going to talk about climate, but you hit a couple of things that I'm just interested about as a meteorologist. And if you are a weather nerd and you're listening, you might be wondering, we're going to go through two events here. One, people always ask this to me as far as what is it like if like a tornado is happening in your area, like what is the experience that you're having during that event? So I want to hear about Irma and maybe a little bit of Dorian. What is the feeling of everybody that you're working with is going through? And then once we talk about that, I just want to hear a little bit more about your family and how they were impacted by the tornadoes.
Yeah, great questions. And I am sure I could talk really long. I'll try and be brief. For Hurricane Irma, one of the biggest things for Irma was, if you remember, Hurricane Matthew, while it didn't make direct landfall in Florida, it came so close to Florida that it actually really damaged the coast, the Atlantic coast. And so 11 months later, you now have Irma. And it was a pretty early on where we knew that Irma, while we don't know where it's exactly going to go, this thing was going to be a monster. I mean, every model had it blowing up. There was going to be a nice strong ridge that was going to push it south, even though it went, north of all the islands. And it went north of Puerto Rico and all those areas that typically we're concerned about. And then it typically goes out to sea. Well, the ridge of high pressure just pushed this thing so far west, it actually ended up making landfall in Cuba first. But I think with that particular event, people were so scarred, even by the near landfall of Matthew, and especially these beachside communities, that we knew that even if Irma missed, if it did the same thing, it was just going to be, it would just build on to the issues that had already occurred with Matthew. So learning about the area, this was my first year that I'm down there. I missed Matthew. I'm down there for Irma. And another thing that, being in Ohio, I didn't really know that Florida actually has a south to north moving river called the St. Johns River. And
I didn't know that either.
This thing is not just a river. It's basically a bona fide, a slow moving lake by the time that it gets up to Jacksonville. So when you have a landfalling hurricane in the southern peninsula of Florida that's moving due north up the peninsula, we received 10 to 15 inches of rain following a very wet, record wet summer. And so we have all this fresh water in this river. And when the circulation came up into really west of Jacksonville, the wind shift caused all of that water that was stuck in that basically a large river or lake to go straight into downtown Jacksonville. And they experienced their highest water, basically the above normal high tides of over 5 feet. And that is like, for a downtown area, I guess, imagine, 6 feet of extra water being in downtown Dayton,
and
that's
insane.
Impacting like impacting sky rises and, all these businesses that have never seen water before, even with like the heaviest of rainfall. So, I mean, like I said, I could go on for probably hours with just but it was just an incredible phenomenon seeing the experience of that Jacksonville, Florida office team and everything that they knew and prepared for all was realized on that day, even though the landfall was all the way at, Naples, right? Naples, Florida, way down in the south. So incredible experience there. Dorian, I'll keep nice and short and sweet, is like, being again in that emergency operations center and working with people who are just walking up to you saying, hey, are we going to be closing bridges tonight? Are the winds going to get over 40 miles an hour? And you're basically left there with going, what's the decision going to be? And that's a whole different realm of, I mean, we have just hard decisions to make in the office with warning decisions and watch decisions. But when you have a customer that's like right there and they're making big money decisions, big personnel decisions, it was an incredible experience. I spent 3 days in that building, and it was just a phenomenal experience.
Wow.
Transitioning to Memorial Day. I was actually working a midnight shift on Memorial Day, so it's actually really convenient because here I am in Jacksonville. It was a quiet May day, and any thunderstorms that we typically have during the daytime, they fall apart during the evening with the sun setting. So it was a very chill forecast night. It was just me and one other guy, and I'm watching everything unfolding in Dayton. And I'm just like my mouth is on the floor, just seeing these storms and tornadoes move through a major metropolitan area, and it's like I just growing up in Ohio my entire life, like that's the worst case scenario. It's late in the evening and you're just thinking the worst. But I messaged my family because I'm like, typically storms fizzle out, in the evening time. But I'm like, typically we don't have major tornadoes moving through metropolitan areas. So this is not a normal
isn't typical.
Let alone in the evening.
I told my family, I said, I would say give it an hour and a half. I wouldn't go to bed. I would keep an eye on these things. And it was actually the tornadic cell that caused the Trotwood, all the major EF3 and EF4 tornadoes straight through Dayton. It was actually that cell. It remained discrete through Beaver Creek, through Washington Courthouse, through south of Xenia. It just remained its own little thing. And so I'm just watching this thing, and I'm giving my family like hour countdown, half an hour countdown, and then right as the storm entered the side of the valley, it decided to get all tornado frenzy again. And and so I'm watching this tornado form just south of where I grew up in Circleville, Ohio, and I'm like, this thing's tracking through basically every place that I know, and grew up in. I know, and fortunately it missed the town of Circleville, so it avoided the high population town there. And now it's just traveling through mostly rural areas, and it's like it's going right toward my parents' house. So I give them a 15-minute countdown. I see the debris signature. I see it cross like a landmark that I'm like, okay, if it made it this far, then they just have to seek shelter and just be done with it. And hopefully it misses. And nope, it decided to go right over their house. It wasn't more than 100 yards when it went through there, and it just went right over the house. Hit an Amish house, hit a couple other houses. I mean, it was minor damage. The second floor was probably really close to collapsing because one of the walls had actually been pulled out. So it was really close to being, just that much worse. Fortunately, it was, my dad, one of our dogs would not go into the cellar that we have. And so he remained like on the same floor, and some windows shattered, and there were some minor like scrapes and a little bit of blood, but fully rebuilt the house, and we've moved on. And talk about an experience being 800 miles away. Not only the Dayton stuff, but now my own personally family being impacted. I mean, these 5 years have been a whirlwind.
And I know like that feeling of, as a meteorologist, having all that knowledge. So there you are just looking at these products and, just based on your experience, what is happening, and being able to understand that more than the average person, and being so far away, I'm sure was extremely difficult. And we're seeing more and more of these powerful hurricanes, tornado outbreaks, meaning more tornadoes in one particular day than throughout the entire season, and extreme temperatures and cold. And so I think this is kind of like a really good point to start pivoting, talking more about the daily climate. And for the everyday person, you hear us say the average high for today is this. Can you explain where that number comes from?
I will start off and be completely honest with everyone that listens to this. And the fact of the matter is, the last time the climate normals were made were 10 years ago. I was 19 years old. I was in high school. You know, I guess I was actually in lower end college, or I just started, and I didn't really care about the new normals back then. Well, times changed. I'm now in an organization that, you know, fundamentally formulates them, and it starts actually at the world level. The World Meteorological Organization, or WMO, is the one that kind of establishes how these things are created, why they're created, at what time intervals are they created. So when I knew that these new normals were coming, and I'm sort of the climate focal point here, like the guy that takes care of all this stuff, it was sort of the responsibility was put on me to kind of come up with this. And like I said, being honest with you, I really didn't know a whole lot. So I had to do some digging, some investigating. I created my own just raw 30-year normals, just as like a guesstimation, you know, what's this going to be like? And I quickly realized that what the 30-year climate normals are just simply 30-year averages of data. If they were that simple, I honestly think if it were that simple, we wouldn't actually gain as much as we do with them being created that they are. So a lot of research, people who are much smarter than me when it comes to climate values and the formulas that they use, and the all the techniques, they work on establishing those. I'm just a customer like you guys. The data comes in, we see it, we see those normals, and kind of like how I'm an operational meteorologist, and instead of like figuring out the exact how the exact how, I much more enjoy the why. And so when it comes to these 30-year normals, when it comes to the why aren't they just 30-year averages of raw data? I mean, that makes sense to me. I can compute it. I can do it. Cool. The key here is that 30-year normals, while we do use those as the benchmark, the techniques and methods that are used actually calibrate those 30 years, the values that actually come out closer to where we are now. I mean, if you think about 30 years, that's a long time, and with a rapidly changing climate, that could be a big difference. So instead of maybe putting as much weight as what happened between 1990 and 2000, we can actually cater these values closer to what we are experiencing right now. Because as you guys said, we use these new normals to compare to every single variable, different time scales. This week we were above normal for so if you think about it, how much we compare to them, wouldn't you rather compare something that's calibrated to the most recent climate versus something that's just a raw 30-year average? So that's sort of what I would, point to any listener who's maybe questioning why not just 30-year raw data as an average. It's really meant to highlight the significance of weather events. Even though weather and climate are different, it's meant to highlight the significance of events that occur in the current present day.
Right, because you have to think about. Go ahead, Kirstie.
I was going to say, so for just kind of understanding it since it's playing to what's happening a little more in the current time frame, when you're breaking records and or going above normal, that means even more because we're going above normal in a warmer climate, if that makes sense, than what it was if we were just using the straight up raw data, right? Is that kind of a way of understanding it?
Yeah, because I think if you think of the way, if you were to actually look at the data, you would see, let's go back 30 years and say you're just taking the average high, you're going to see that it's a steady climb. It's more of a slope than it is high, low, high, low. And in that sense, taking the middle wouldn't be so bad because year to year is fluctuating. But the fact that it is continually increasing, if you were to take an average, it isn't a true average. It's kind of giving a misinformation that the average is in the middle when really we're much warmer now. So I can see why they use different equations to kind of push it a little bit, closer to today's date in that climate average.
Yep. I think it's also part of their methodology is not just to use the station that they're looking at. It's more than just it's almost like an area type of a deal. Like you talk about Dayton, we're using the Dayton International Airport, which is actually on the northwest side of town, closer to rural areas. While you don't necessarily want the influence of the metropolitan area on the data,
right.
I mean, it kind of should, because that's where a lot of the people are.
Yeah.
You want to know what the averages are doing in these sort of larger cities where most of the people
Are
exist.
concentrated.
So, correct. So they use more than just the data that's observed at the station. They look at surrounding stations and they compare the tracks. They look at, any differences. Were there any sort of changes in the location of the station? Were there any changes to the instrumentation or the calibration? I mean, like I said, when I started diving in, I was very well informed that my simple understanding of averages of 30 years was very naive.
I didn't realize that there was that comparison as well of surrounding stations. And this kind of makes me think too, when we talk about computer models, how if we had more weather balloon launches, we'd have a better atmospheric, look at what the atmosphere is. We've got large, unfortunately, gaps across the United States where that data is not collected. So you think also of how important weather stations are, not just at our airports, but at the smaller airports, because that all feeds into it. And having those instruments work really is important. And the more there are in a surrounding area, the better your climate snapshot is going to be, kind of.
It's definitely the hope.
Yeah. So, how important, or why is it important that we keep these averages when it comes to telling the forecast? Is there a big reason why? And did you see a big change from the last 30 years to this 30 year?
I do think that we brushed on it a little bit with regards to the reason why they're important. Instead of just looking at it as what was the average weather the last 30 years, it really isn't. It's an applicable thing. We want to not just look at what were the last. I'm not doing a summer project. We're not doing this simple project of what was the last 30 years. Can I do a 30-year average of data? This is a much more applied purpose to these normals. People use them for planning. If a city is seeing a rapid increase in precipitation, maybe they've got to work on their infrastructure. A business, if a business is, I don't know, a heating and cooling business, maybe they need to start increasing their planning for how are we going to improve our air conditioning units because of that extra demand. So there's an application to these with regards to business planning. And then again, I'll just reiterate, showing the significance of current weather compared to what these normals show. And while it's not Dayton, I will provide an example to that, and that's Cincinnati. I'm sure you guys have noticed that Cincinnati's been, at least the airport, has been able to be hit by some of these more heavier rainfall events, and they're somewhere above 4.5 inches for just this 2 summer months, above the 30-year normals, above that average. So this is something that's already been tuned upward, if you want to say. Our climate is warming, our climate is getting more, because it's warming, it's able to hold more moisture. And it's like, here we are in a summer where, the values have already been kind of adjusted and increased to, reflect the current climate. And now it's still above it. We're still over 4.5 inches above. Cincinnati is, for that summer period, July 1st to current, it's second all time, going back 140 years. 150 years. I mean, it's an incredible data set that I think it's more than just doing an analysis of the last 30 years. It is, how can we take that data and apply it to what we can have right now for planning, business, and then also just current weather.
What is something that you've taken away specifically, since you're the climate guy, for the data set for Dayton? So looking at how did our temperatures trend? How has our rainfall trended? Which obviously I'm not going to be surprised. Well, we've already seen the numbers and shared them, but I'd like, a little bit of insight from you. If maybe someone is just starting to listen, like what have those changes occurred in this data set for 30 years?
Yeah, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. Obviously, we have a resource, weather.gov/ILN/new normals. There you can find Cincinnati, Dayton, Columbus, wherever you're, whichever one you're closest to, you can find the specific numbers there. But Dayton in particular did see a much higher increase than probably most of us were expecting, especially even compared to Columbus and Cincinnati. So perhaps this was something that was part of their techniques and methods that resulted in this adjustment, and perhaps it's also reflective of some of the warming temperatures being more observed more readily across the Dayton area versus decades past. So it's an interesting thing with regards to seeing the temperatures jump up that warm. It was something that caught my eye, and I was like, that something can't be right. Why are the numbers that high, or were adjusted that high? And that's when I started doing the investigation. So for me as the climate guy, I really had to, even educate myself. Even though I'm a meteorologist, climatology is a whole different breed of science and methods and expertise. So I did have to do a little bit of investigation. So I encourage anybody that's listening that has seen the new normals come out, and maybe they're confused as to why they were adjusted so high. I mean, I think December's max temperature for Dayton something like 3.5 degrees higher, the normal for the month. It's incredible the numbers that came out. But again, I'll remind people that it's not just an average of the 30 years. It is it's a calibrated, and it's a well agreed upon by, like I said, the world. This is the method that we're using all across
not
the world.
Not just Nate McGinnis.
Right.
Not just Nate McGinnis'
The world.
methods, right? My methods were right. So that's what I found out really quickly. I will say one more thing with regards to this is, while Dayton's were seen to show a big shove in the warmer direction, one thing that the NCEI, the National Centers for Environmental Information, they're the ones that dealt with all these calculations and distributed all the information. They actually, because of some of these questions like, why is this so much higher than the raw, or why is there so much precipitation, or maybe why didn't we see as many changes here? They actually showed their entire distribution of stations across the country that they ran this their 2020 calculations on that 30-year period. It actually came out to about a net zero gain. They basically wanted to illustrate that not all stations were adjusted into the positive, warmer direction. Gotcha. If you looked at all of the stations that they did the calculations for, some of them actually saw an adjustment downward based on all the things that we had talked about. So, for Dayton would just ended up being on the warmer side of that spectrum. But overall, across the entire country, some hundreds, if not thousands, of stations all showed that compared to the 1981 to 2010 normals, it basically was a net zero gain with regards to that influence of the methodology.
I can see how you can quickly just go down the rabbit hole, because like you said, if you look at one pinpoint and you're like, oh, Dayton was warmer, and you just apply that everywhere, that's not true. And then you look, oh, the United States actually didn't have a net gain or loss. Then you're like, wait, we got to think about the whole world. And that's really where you have to get the big picture. And climate is one of those things, just like the daily weather, there's more and more data that we're collecting every day. This study is constantly evolving, and we're learning from it. And that's why we love it so much. Nate, thank you so much for hopping on here. I didn't know if you had any final question, Kirstie, but we just have about 5 minutes left here, or if Nate, there was anything less more that you wanted to add.
I will say, I'll go first. How about that? And then if Kirstie has a question, one thing that I wanted to follow up on with what you said, McCall, is that you have to zoom out. Oftentimes we get so tracked into what's happening in our backyard. That goes from current weather to climate weather. When it comes to our daily decisions that we make with regards to, do we camp tonight? Do we not camp tonight? A lot of our decisions are backyard based, but a lot of the information that you receive may be in a broader sense than that. So I always like to encourage people to zoom out, look at the broader picture, and it goes with climate too. I mean, parts of the north central United States actually saw their temperatures cool.
Yeah.
All right. I mean, that's actually a factor of more storm systems and more moisture. So it's not just about we care about what we live in and where we are, but it's not just about where it's not about ourselves. It's about the broader picture, and so I always encourage people, especially when it comes to climate, zoom out a little bit.
I love that. And honestly, Nate, I think that's a great point to end on, because that big wide view is really going to help us all out. And it does help your backyard decision, because it goes big to small.
Yeah.
So I think that was wonderful, Nate. A really, really easy and good way to understand all of it. I learned something, McCall. I don't know about you. I did not know that there was that much methodology into those 30-year numbers. So thank you so much for diving in with us.
Yes, absolutely. And if you ever want to get any information from the Weather Service, as Nate mentioned, you can head to weather.gov/ILN. Nate, I don't know if there's any direct email or a social media way that they can get a hold of you.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I'll just stick to the business. So nate.mcginnis@noaa.gov is where you can ask me any questions. If you're listening to this and you have additional questions, I'll get to them as soon as I can.
Thank you so much, Nate, for joining us. And as always, if you're listening to Cloudy with a Chance at podcast, thank you for listening. Be sure to share with your friends, tell them to download, subscribe, even rate us or give a comment and let us know what kind of topics you want to hear more about. If you're watching the video version, you can share this as well. We'll be posting it over on our YouTube account. As always, you can find Cloudy with a Chance at podcast anywhere the podcast audio is available to you, whether it's an Apple or an Android device. You can watch the video version on Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple TV, and again on YouTube. As always, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Thank you.